I used to think owning a serious business meant eventually becoming responsible for a serious number of people. Employees, managers, payroll, schedules, hiring, training, someone calling in sick before a shift, someone quitting right before the busiest weekend of the year. The bigger I imagined the business becoming, the bigger I imagined the team behind it becoming too. Then I started noticing businesses that seemed to break that rule. I would walk into a laundromat late at night and there was nobody behind a counter. The machines were running, customers were paying, money was still moving. I would pull into a parking lot, pay automatically, and leave without seeing an attendant. I would buy from a vending machine or drive through a car wash where equipment handled almost the entire transaction. Eventually, I started asking myself a strange question. How much of a business could I remove before it stopped being a business? Could I remove the cashier, the receptionist, the manager, the office? And finally, could I remove every permanent employee and still own something capable of generating serious money? That question changed the way I looked at business. Instead of searching for companies that needed more people as they grew, I started searching for models built around machines, software, automatic payments, cameras, remote monitoring, and outside contractors. And I found far more of them than I expected. Some could be started with a few machines. Others required expensive equipment, leases, land, or real estate. Some could be monitored almost entirely from a phone. Others looked passive until a machine failed or a weak location stopped producing revenue. But all of them shared one unusual feature. A single owner could theoretically operate the business without permanent employees. Financially, that changes more than it first appears. An employee is not an expense I pay only when I need help. Payroll keeps arriving, taxes keep arriving, insurance may keep arriving. Training costs money, scheduling takes time, and when revenue falls during a bad month, those costs do not politely disappear. But if I own an automated parking lot and a payment terminal breaks, I can hire a technician for one repair. If I own a laundromat and the building needs cleaning, I can pay a cleaning company for scheduled visits. If I own vending machines, software can tell me which machines need inventory instead of forcing me to check every location manually. I am still paying for labor. I am just buying that labor differently. That was the first misconception I had to get rid of. A business with no employees is not a business with no labor costs. It is a business where permanent payroll is replaced by equipment, automation, software, contractors, and whatever work I still choose to do myself. Imagine two businesses each producing $20,000 in monthly revenue. One needs several employees every day. The other uses automated payments and contractors only for cleaning and repairs. Their revenue may look identical, but the money left after expenses can be completely different. That sounds like an enormous advantage. But removing employees does not remove rent. It does not remove electricity. It does not remove insurance, maintenance, financing, software fees, equipment replacement, taxes, or bad locations. If an automated payment terminal stops working, revenue can simply stop until somebody fixes it. If I place a vending machine in the wrong building, automation does not create customers. If I buy a laundromat with terrible utility economics, fewer employees will not rescue the margins. If I overpay for a parking lot with weak demand, cameras will only automate a bad investment. That became the central contradiction. The fewer people I needed, the more important the system became. Location, equipment, payments, pricing, and numbers all had to work. So I decided to compare 10 real businesses and find out which ones could. The first business I looked at was probably the most obvious one: vending machines. At first, it seemed almost too simple. I buy a machine. I place it somewhere with enough foot traffic. I fill it with drinks, snacks, or another product. Customers pay without me being there, and I return only when the machine needs inventory or maintenance. No cashier, no manager, no permanent employee. That is exactly why vending gets described as passive income so often. But the more I looked at the numbers, the more I realized the machine itself was not really the business. The location was. A new machine in a quiet hallway could make almost nothing. An older one in a busy warehouse, hospital, gym, or transportation hub could perform far better. So I stopped thinking about vending as buying equipment and started thinking about it as buying access to customer traffic. The basic economics were easy to understand. Suppose I spend $6,000 setting up a machine. If it generates $1,200 in monthly sales, sounds impressive. But $1,200 in revenue is not $1,200 in profit. I still have to replace the products people bought. If inventory consumes 45% of sales, that is $540 gone immediately. Then the property owner may want a commission for giving me the location. If the agreement costs 12% of revenue, another $144 disappears. Card processing takes a cut. Products expire. Machines break. Fuel costs money every time I restock. After all of that, my $1,200 machine might leave closer to $350 or $450 before taxes and before valuing my own time. That is still attractive, but it is very different from the fantasy of putting a box in a building and collecting every tenge that enters it. The first twist was that eliminating employees did not eliminate operations. It simply compressed the work. Instead of standing beside the machine 8 hours a day, I might spend several hours each week buying inventory, loading products, checking sales data, driving between locations, handling refunds, and fixing small problems. One machine could be manageable. 10 machines create a route. 30 can become a logistics company, and that is where automation starts mattering. Modern vending software can show me sales by machine, product levels, payment problems, and sometimes even temperature alerts. Instead of visiting every location just to see what is empty, I can know before I leave home. That changes the economics because unnecessary driving is a hidden labor cost. If I spend 3 hours visiting machines that do not need inventory, I may not have paid an employee, but I still spent 3 hours of my own time producing nothing. The best operators stock based on sales, group machines geographically, and remove products that sit too long. But none of those improvements matter if the location is weak. That was the second twist. The vending machine does not create demand. It captures demand that already exists. If 2,000 people pass the machine every day, but almost everyone has cheaper food nearby, the traffic number can be misleading. If only 150 people pass it, but they are employees working a night shift with no nearby store, that location can be more valuable. So before I bought anything, I would want to know who walks past the machine, how long they stay, what alternatives they have, what hours they are there, and what the property owner expects in return. The machine is only the delivery system. The location agreement is the asset. And that taught me something bigger. When I remove workers, I do not remove the need for good decisions. I make those decisions more important. A machine cannot rescue a bad decision after the customer arrives. So vending became my first test. It showed me that a one-person business could generate recurring revenue without permanent staff. But it also gave me the rule I would keep finding again and again. Automation can replace repetitive labor. It cannot replace bad economics. The second business I looked at was a self-service laundromat, and this immediately felt more serious. Unlike a vending machine, I was not buying one box and placing it inside someone else's building. I was buying an entire system. Washers, dryers, payment terminals, water lines, gas, electricity, rent, security, maintenance. And yet, from the customer's point of view, almost everything could still happen without an employee. I could unlock the doors automatically in the morning. Cameras could monitor the store. Customers could pay with cards, apps, or reloadable laundry cards. Machines could report errors remotely. A cleaning company could come in on a schedule. A technician could be called only when something actually broke. In theory, I could own it without permanent payroll, but the startup costs changed the game. With vending, I could test one machine and learn cheaply. With a laundromat, I could have tens of millions of tangs tied up before the first customer washed a shirt. Suppose I took over a small existing location for $250,000. That number alone would not tell me if I had bought a good business. I would still need to know how old the machines were, what the lease looked like, how much water the store consumed, whether gas prices were rising, how often equipment failed, and whether a newer competitor had opened 2 streets away. The revenue model was simple. Customers paid me to use the machines, but the expenses were heavier than I expected. Imagine the store produced $25,000 in monthly revenue. If rent cost $5,000, utilities took $6,000. Cleaning and repairs averaged $2,000. Payment systems, insurance, supplies, and other expenses consumed another $1,500. I would already be down to around $10,500 before debt payments and taxes. That could still be strong. But if I had financed the purchase and owed $6,500 every month to the bank, the picture changed. The store could be profitable on paper and still leave me with far less cash than the headline revenue suggested. That was the first lesson. A laundromat could remove payroll, but it could not remove capital intensity. I was replacing people with machines, and machines had their own costs. They depreciated. They consumed utilities. They needed parts. Eventually, they needed replacement. If I ignored that replacement cost because no invoice arrived today, I could fool myself into thinking the business was more profitable than it really was. Then came the second issue, utilization. A washer that sat empty earned nothing, but I still paid rent for the floor underneath it. Location mattered again, but differently from vending. I did not just need traffic, I needed households that actually needed the service. Demand mattered. A beautiful laundromat in a neighborhood where nearly every apartment had its own washer could struggle. An older, less impressive store near dense rental housing could produce far more revenue. Then there was pricing. If I charged too little, the machines stayed busy, but my utility costs could eat the margin. If I charged too much, customers could drive somewhere else. So I started thinking of every washer as a small piece of productive equipment. My job was not just to keep it running. My job was to keep it running often enough, at the right price, with enough margin per cycle to justify the capital tied up inside it. That was the part I found most interesting. A laundromat could look almost passive because customers did the physical work themselves. They loaded the machines, they moved the clothes, they waited, they folded. But financially, I still had to manage a complicated machine business hiding behind a simple storefront. The better the system was, the less visible I became. And that was exactly the model I was looking for. Not a business with no work. A business where my work shifted away from serving every customer and toward maintaining the system that served them. The third business I looked at was an automated parking lot, and this was the first model where I could really see software replacing an entire layer of staff. Normally, I imagined a parking business with attendants, ticket booths, cash drawers, supervisors, and someone physically watching cars come and go. But that version is becoming optional. A small lot outside a busy commercial area could work very differently. I could install cameras that recognize license plates, connect them to a payment system, let customers pay through an app or kiosk, and monitor the property remotely. If a gate stopped working, I could call a contractor. No permanent attendant, no cashier, no on-site manager. But then I started looking at what I was actually buying. I was not really buying parking spaces. I was buying access to a location where drivers were willing to pay for temporary use of land. With a parking lot, the biggest expense could be the property itself. Suppose I found a small lot outside Dallas, Texas with 40 spaces. If I leased the land for $12,000 per month and charged an average of $15 per vehicle, I would need 800 paid parking sessions every month just to cover rent. That is before insurance, software, processing, lighting, security, cleaning, taxes, repairs, and financing. The first question became occupancy. How many spaces were actually filled, and for how many hours? A 40-space lot averaging 80% occupancy near a stadium, hospital, airport, or downtown office district could be valuable. The same lot at 15% occupancy could be a financial trap. And unlike a vending machine, I could not move the property to a better location next week. The location was not just important, it was permanent. Then I started thinking about pricing. Parking is unusual because the product is the same square of pavement, but its value can change depending on time. A space might be worth very little on a quiet Tuesday afternoon and several times more during a concert, sports event, convention, or airport rush. With the right software, I could change prices automatically based on demand. That meant automation could do more than replace labor. It could improve revenue. If I charged too aggressively, drivers could choose another lot. If I priced too low during peak demand, I could fill every space and still leave money on the table. So the system had to remove friction for the customer and protect the economics for me. A parking lot only works if people actually pay. Without attendance, I would depend on cameras, plate recognition, barriers, digital records, towing agreements, or outside enforcement services. That meant I had not eliminated control. I had automated it. I could remove permanent employees, but every function they performed still had to exist somewhere. Payments still had to be collected. Customers still had to be monitored. Problems still had to be resolved. The only question was whether software, equipment, or contractors could handle those functions more cheaply and reliably than payroll. This was where parking became interesting to me. If the lot was in the right place, demand was steady, and the payment system worked, one owner could manage a surprisingly valuable asset from a phone. Revenue could arrive while I was miles away. There was no inventory to restock. No products could expire. No washing machines were consuming water every cycle. But I was taking on a different kind of risk. I was betting heavily on one location. If a nearby office closed, a stadium moved, local parking rules changed, or a competitor opened a cheaper garage, revenue could fall fast while the property costs stayed the same. So automated parking gave me another rule. The more automated the operation became, the more concentrated the strategic risk could become. I did not need a team to run the lot, but I absolutely needed to choose the right lot. That changed my calculation too. The fourth business I looked at was a small self-storage facility, and this one changed the way I thought about an employee-free business. At first, storage seemed almost boring. A row of metal doors, concrete, cameras, a gate, customers paying every month to keep things they did not have room for at home. But financially, that simplicity was exactly the attraction. I did not need cashiers serving people daily. I did not need a sales team walking the property. I did not even need someone handing over keys if the facility used digital access codes, online contracts, automatic billing, and remote cameras. A customer could find a unit online, choose a size, sign the rental agreement, pay with a card, receive a gate code, and move in without meeting me. But then I looked at the numbers. Suppose I bought or built a small facility with 80 units. If the average unit rented for $100 per month and the property stayed 90% occupied, 72 units would be paying customers. That would produce about $7,200 in monthly revenue. It sounded incredible until I remembered the rule I had already learned. Revenue was only the first number. I still had property taxes, insurance, security, software, lighting, repairs, landscaping, payment processing, marketing, and possibly a large loan on the property. If those operating costs totaled $2,200 a month and debt service consumed another $3,000, my $7,200 in revenue could leave roughly $2,000 before taxes and major capital expenses. But the business depended on occupancy. At 90%, the numbers looked healthy. At 60%, the same facility would have only 48 paying units, producing $4,800 per month. Most of my fixed costs would not fall with revenue. The cameras still needed to run. The insurance still had to be paid. The loan still came due. That was the first major risk. An empty storage unit had almost no variable cost, but it also generated nothing. So the entire game became a balance between occupancy and price. If I cut rates too aggressively, I could fill the property but reduce the income of every unit. If I pushed prices too high, occupancy could fall. And because customers often stayed for months or years, a small pricing decision repeated across dozens of units could materially change annual profit. Then I found another interesting feature. Storage had almost no inventory. The customer brought the inventory. I was selling secure space. That made the operating model cleaner than vending or laundromats, but it also meant the land and buildings were doing almost all the economic work. If I bought the wrong property at the wrong price, automation would not save me. A facility in an area with growing apartments, smaller homes, moving activity, or local businesses needing extra space could stay full. One built where everyone had basements, garages, and cheap land could struggle. The second twist was that the business could become more profitable after I stopped trying to maximize occupancy. If every unit was always full and there was a waiting list, that could mean my prices were too low. A slightly lower occupancy rate at higher rents could produce more profit with fewer customers. That was different from the way I instinctively thought about business. More customers did not automatically mean more money. The right customers at the right price mattered more. And the employee-free structure amplified that. If I could automate billing, access, reminders, security, and contracts, then adding another customer barely changed my workload. That was the real advantage. I was not trying to work harder each time revenue increased. I was trying to build a property where revenue could increase without my daily involvement increasing at the same speed. Self-storage showed me what scalability looked like when the product was space and the system handled the repetitive work. That was the scale I wanted. More revenue without permanent staff every day.